Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosie O'Brien Boytek, and I'm the Assistant Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Schools, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our continued roundtable conversation for Connecticut early childhood administrators. Today's session is Progress Monitoring During the Pandemic. We at CAS are very excited to collaborate with the Office of Early Childhood, the Connecticut State Department of Education, and the Regional Education Service Center's RESC Alliance to support the needs of all of Connecticut's youngest learners, including children with special needs and other vulnerable populations, by sharing with you the most current information, as well as research and best practices for early childhood education. There's so much to think about as we design and implement teaching and learning during this 2021 school year, especially for our youngest students across the state. So we're really glad that you're here with us today. Just a couple of quick reminders. Everyone's been muted to begin with, but once we get into the breakout rooms, please unmute yourself to talk with each other. If possible, please turn your video on, as it's nice to be able to see everyone, especially when we're working in small groups. When we're working as a whole group, please ask questions in the chat or raise your hand with the button at the bottom of the screen so that you can be recognized. And please use the chat feature to ask questions, share ideas, and let us know if you experience technical problems during the Zoom meeting, as we will be monitoring the chat. However, when you're in the breakout rooms, the chat feature is only seen by the people in your breakout room. If you have questions or need help when you're in the breakout room, please use the help button and one of the hosts will respond. This webinar is being recorded, but only during the whole group activities. We're unable to record the small group conversations during the breakout room portion of the webinar. However, the rest of the webinar will be recorded and will be posted for future viewing on the CAS, OEC, CSDE, and RESC websites. So please be sure to share the link to this webinar with your colleagues once it's posted. Again, I would like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today's webinar: Julie Giaconi, the Early Childhood Education Coordinator at CREC, Judy Corteau, an Early Childhood Consultant at Advance, and Anne-Marie Davidson, an Early Childhood Specialist at EastCon. Welcome, ladies, and Julie, I think you're up first.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm going to share my screen, and you'll notice it's not necessarily in presentation mode. It is because there's going to be some interaction where I'm going to actually be interacting with the slides at the same time. So it's just going to be easier for me to kind of keep it in this particular mode for today. So progress monitoring during the pandemic. I'm not sure if folks went to this earlier in the week, the assessment that was hosted by State Department of Ed and the RESC Alliance, and it had the communities of practice for SLPs and special ed teachers, but it was all at the early childhood level. I just wanted to speak to, this is not going to be about evaluation. This is going to be about progress monitoring, which are two separate things, separate activities. So I just kind of wanted to offer that clarity before we start. Okay, so our journey thus far. I apologize for all the text on the screen, but it's divided by black and red just for ease on the eyes, brain-based strategy. I wanted to go over where we've been and where we're going, because there is a purpose to all of this. Earlier on, we had surveyed folks for what they felt their needs were. And we did this prior to the pandemic, then we did it during the spring last year, so that we would have some type of guidance for how we could best meet your needs. So I wanted to get back to the purpose of a roundtable is not necessarily to be a workshop in and of itself. It's a roundtable where information is shared, and then you're connecting it to your own practices and procedures and policies in your district, and you're having an opportunity to talk about this with colleagues, and then come back together and kind of share out so that we can kind of brainstorm as a think tank together. Because none of us have ever been in this position before, and there's no handbook for doing anything during a pandemic. So we are kind of learning a lot of this as we go. The topics when we met in July and August were preparing to reopen. So we offered that with opportunities to talk to individuals who had remained open during the spring and those that had in-person learning during the summer. We then went to, okay, let's talk about what specially designed instruction really is. what is it meant to be? And then how has that been impacted? How has it changed as we move towards remote learning and hybrid learning? We then went to engaging families. We all know families are part of this team. They are a critical part of this team. And I think we're becoming even more aware how important they are as we're trying to progress monitor. And we have children that are 100% remote. I think we're also finding out how important our community-based preschools are, because we have a lot of the children who would be remote because maybe there's your school district has closed down and moved to all remote, but those children now sit in community-based preschool settings. So we went into coaching and collaborating with families and preschool teachers and what their roles look like as teachers and models and co-implementers of that specially designed instruction. Last month, we took a kind of a step back and did self-care as far as taking care of oneself and what are the strategies so that we can really reflect and take care of ourselves, so that we can be the best for our children and families that we work with. We're going to kind of rock through progress monitoring this morning, but I also wanted to let you know that for next month, we're going to be going right into segueing into pre-K to K transition. So I think you'll notice that with all these topics, you cannot silo them. They're all interconnected, and they are a critical part of teaching and learning with children who have special needs. So I just wanted to reiterate before we go on that our roles and responsibilities in monitoring child progress haven't changed. So this is, I'll let you read these, but these are excerpts directly from IDEA, directly from the Division of Early Childhood from Council of Exceptional Children, and the NIAC Developmentally Appropriate Position Statement with regard to what progress monitoring is, what really is assessment, because progress monitoring is a form of formative assessment. You're using information in progress monitoring, not just to monitor the child's progress, but to determine whether or not what you're doing as a practitioner is working. And our roles and responsibilities have not changed. We are still obligated to provide specially designed instruction and to monitor the progress of children who are receiving that instruction. And I'm going to switch over to Anne Marie now to speak to this slide.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. So again, this, well, for all of us, it might be a reminder. For some of us, it might be new learning. But we wanted to, as Julie said, the purpose of the roundtable is for you to be able to receive some information and then to reflect on that in terms of your practice. So we wanted to make sure that we emphasized when we're talking about progress monitoring, we wanted to make sure sort of that everyone was on the same page when we think about and understand what makes progress monitoring effective. And as you can see, there isn't just one square on this graphic, or rectangle, I guess, on this graphic. There are multiple. And so part of why we're focusing on it in depth is because it is pretty complex. It is pretty detailed. It's meant to do a really important job. As Julie said, it's meant to meet our responsibilities for monitoring whether children are making progress, but also whether to answer that question about our own instruction. So effective progress monitoring includes all of these components. And again, sometimes when we are struggling with implementing effective progress monitoring, it might be because one of these pieces is not in place or isn't being done well, right? So, or because we don't necessarily have the knowledge to help support us to put these pieces in place, right? Okay, so most really importantly is that it is measuring the performance that we are looking for. We need to make sure we're using an equivalent measure over time. Otherwise, the data we're looking at can't be connected over time. And then one of the other places it often falls down is we make these really cumbersome systems for progress monitoring, and we don't make them easy to use, and we take way too much time away from instruction. And when you talk to teachers, often that's one of the things that they will say. All I do is collect data. I never get time to teach. And so we stop doing things that are really difficult and that we don't want to do. So it's these two pieces are, even though they sound like, well, that's not very important, they really, really are because they impact implementation. So as you go into your discussion, this is again an opportunity for you to reflect on these things and think about what's in place in your practice and what isn't. Again, 7 steps, progress monitoring, right? We're talking about one activity and there's 7 steps that we have to think about. But again, as Julie said, in education in general, certainly in special education, everything is linked. We really wanted to ground the fact that progress monitoring doesn't happen all by itself. We don't just walk in one day and decide, oh, what are we going to progress monitor today, right? It starts with the IEP. It starts with what's in there in terms of goals and objectives. And when those goals and objectives are written in a measurable, observable way, it makes progress monitoring so much easier. So if people are struggling with progress monitoring, it may be that your IEPs actually need to be adjusted, okay? And then we move into, once we have really well-written goals and objectives, then we move into making decisions about how we collect the data. We have to design our data collection tools. We have to make sure that we are collecting the data. Then we reflect on the data, and then we make adjustments. And then, of course, last but not least, we are responsible for using that information to communicate to parents, to communicate to team members, so that we can, again, make those instructional adjustments. So again, just 2 pieces of lots of information, but 2 slides for you to reflect on as you go into your breakout sessions. Questions, comments, or thoughts about any of that?
You can always put questions into the chat at any given point. Again, this is a round table. You can unmute yourself and pause us and ask a question. Okay, so looks like we're going to be moving forward here. So we've anchored it into what progress monitoring is. It hasn't changed. I want to reiterate, has not changed. The purpose of it, how we're doing it, has been affected by the pandemic. So what we'd like to do now, without any further ado, is we're going to break out into breakout rooms, and we want to have an opportunity for you to talk amongst yourselves with your colleagues as far as what systems and practices your preschool team has used for progress monitoring in the past before the pandemic. So what did it look like before the pandemic? You're going to want to have a recorder that kind of writes and jots down what's discussed, the ideas, the systems, the practices, because when we get back together, we're going to report out, and I'm going to be creating a 2-column list as far as your contributions for pre-pandemic, and then what you have done, how it's been impacted, what it now kind of looks like amidst the pandemic. So we will go into breakout rooms now. We'll be there for about 8 minutes.
All right. I hope that you had great conversations. The group that I was in, and you're able to hear me, right, Jean? Yeah. So I hope you were able to actually really get in there and start digging at what you have been doing. So this is our opportunity to share out. So I am going to just begin by sharing out some of the conversations that happened in our group, and then I'm going to ask for some additional input. So pre-pandemic, what Jessica was saying is that they felt good about progress monitoring. They had a system in place. They were observing children, that natural observation. They were having opportunities for one-on-one interactions. They had a spreadsheet that they were using to organize the goals and objectives. They had checklists to be looking at skills that children were demonstrating. And they also had team meetings. They were meeting specifically every 6 weeks to discuss children's goals and objectives, but then they were also having periodic weekly meetings to discuss where children are. So the sense was they were feeling great about where they were, and then all of a sudden the pandemic happened. So I'm interested to hear from other groups. So I'm just going to ask for a volunteer from any of the other groups to just kind of add onto this list of how progress monitoring was working for you before the pandemic.
Sure, I can share from our group. Some of the other ones we had was anecdotal notes.
Mhm.
And then we had, working with IAs that may have been using Post-its to help out doing some of them.
Thank you, Kimberly. Anyone else have additional areas they want to add to this list?
Yeah, from group one, we talked about just utilizing the dots, in that system in its entirety, as well as the family input questionnaire. Very similarly, in terms of for students who are identified as special education, those individualized data trackers, and whether it's discrete trials, observational data, things of that nature. We also talked about some curriculum-based measures, curriculum-based assessments, DIBELS, things like that being administered on, kind of a set testing calendar, if you will. But a lot of similar conversation. And then it was hard to stay away from post-pandemic because that's where we're all kind of struggling right now. So
Exactly. So anyone else have any additional items that they'd like to add to this list pre-pandemically, excuse me. So as we look at this list, okay, Anne Marie has something that she wanted to add in the chat, and she wants to clarify that the IEP goals, and let me just pull up her chat for a second, should be informed by the Connecticut ELDS as a source of standards and outcomes, because they are both goals, but we can use the CT dots to support progress monitoring. So that's a tool that you have available. And I also want to clarify that even though our specific conversation now has been focused on children with IEPs, we're also monitoring all of the children's progress. So it's important to keep that in mind, and we're looking at the standards for that. What do we want children to know and be able to do? So as we look at this list, we've got natural observations, opportunities for one-to-one, spreadsheets and checklists, team meetings, weekly meetings, anecdotal notes, working with instructional assistants, utilizing the dots, individualized trackers. We've got the DIBEL, the DIAL, and shared data collection between our other service providers. So there were systems in place, and for the most part, I think everybody was able to answer this question and felt confident about what they were doing. And then again, when the pandemic happened, everybody just kind of panicked. And one of the biggest challenges with that pandemic was, if you're not seeing the child, or you're not developing a relationship with that child or family in a virtual way, you don't have the child in front of you, or you don't have a connection to that environment where the child is in order to even begin thinking about progress monitoring. So I think initially it was really, really difficult for teachers to make that personal connection with children and families. So these notes will be available to you afterwards, so you don't need to write them down. Any other comments as you look at this list? Okay, we're going to be entering our second breakout room. This time we're going to be talking about during the pandemic, what happened as soon as that hit, and how you are currently measuring children's progress. So Jeannie, if you could put us into our breakout rooms, we'll follow up on that conversation. Great. Okay. So interesting. People were talking a mile a minute, I think, when we got into that breakout room. So Karen graciously agreed to share some of what we were talking about in our breakout room. So Karen, do you mind offering some of your observations and comments?
Sure. So in district, we found that we've been teaming more with parents and collaborating more in terms of service delivery. In particular, my speech and language clinician has found that kids are making actually more gains when parents are present for the speech and language sessions. So that might even be something that she continues next year, even say when we're doing entirely in-person learning, just kind of doing one session like a month, say with a parent, or one session every 2 weeks. And then additionally, we've been collaborating with community providers as well to take a look about getting data about functioning in different settings and collaborating to look at different interventions that can be effective. And we've also been asking parents to give us videos or snapshots of different products that their children have been completing. There was a great matrix that was shared, I think by Andrea a while ago, that talked about just home settings in terms of like, child wakes up, then breakfast, then like lunch, then like playtime and whatnot, and kind of using that matrix to take a look at the ELDs and, what kind of standards can you embed like naturalistically, like say during lunch or say during, outside play. So we've been sharing that with families as well and trying to collaborate about making like naturalistic learning kind of experiences without stressing families out that already have a lot of different responsibilities.
That was great, Karen. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have some strategies that they're using during this pandemic time to gather information on how children are making progress and what their progress is?
I shared, this is Maggie from Weston. I shared out with our breakout group that some of the teachers for our students that are on VDL are actually our related service providers as well are requesting parents videotape and send in small snapshots of their child, either interacting with the peer, or some of our SLPs have used that just to kind of get an idea of language samples. I know the PT had used that for one of her sessions that the internet wasn't working, so she helped send out an idea for an obstacle course, and then had the family kind of do a flip grid and send that back to her. So they've found that helpful to a certain degree. One component.
Thank you, Maggie. Other suggestions, other practices that people are using during this pandemic?
Kendra, are you okay if would you like to share?
Sure. Sorry, I was somebody kept coming in my office. So I just shared in the chat a Google Doc that we created for circle time. It's by far perfect. It's not perfect, but it's something that's really helped our teachers to break down the 30-minute circle time or so that we have for our virtual students and collect some data using that. So if it's helpful to any of you, please feel free to use it. And any advice you have on maybe making it better, we're all ears.
I think too, I think it's something that could be used so this was for circle time specifically, but it could be created for a small group, for a read aloud, for whatever you're doing. But also she shared that they've trained their paras, right? So part of the issue, as everybody knows, engaging young children in a virtual lesson is a challenge. So collecting data becomes even more of a challenge. So if you have two adults participating and one person leading and one person collecting data, that has been a helpful strategy in making sure that the data gets collected.
Okay, anyone else for particular challenges that they haven't even figured out what to do yet, or are really, blocking their progress and figuring out how to move forward?
So I just wanted to mention one strategy that Darian has been using. So, the tag team on the, professional and then para. We've been changing, as silly as it is the backdrops to the Zooms seems to be a motivator for the children, who don't want to engage. So if they're like into snowmans, then they found a background for snowmans, that just tended to help refocus and engage some of the students that were resistant. So I just wanted to offer that out.
go with the flow, right?
Yeah.
Use what's available to you.
Mhm.
So, Julie, did you want to make any comments about what you're seeing between pre-academic and pre-pandemic and what has been going on now? Some of your observations?
Well, I wanted to add to this list
Mhm.
that, and it's not necessarily from the group that I was in, but it's just from a lot of coaching and working with other districts, is that we have some districts that aren't collecting anything virtually, or we have some practitioners that aren't collecting anything virtually because it's a hybrid. So they'll wait until the kids are in front of them, and then they have a lower teacher pupil ratio. So they're going into small groups and being able to collect it that way. Or in the natural course of your day, because again, you have a lower teacher pupil ratio, you're able to get into the children's play and collect it that way using, anecdotals, checklists, video recording for narratives and so forth. I think that there is we do have some folks that are getting, because it is hybrid, because there's not a consistency, because it could be hybrid, but then it could be the days we come back, we're going to close down because we have to quarantine. So we can't necessarily guarantee a schedule from week to week. So as a result, we're trying to scramble to get this information, as much of it as possible. And there are times where we're constructing in that small group when they are in front of me. I don't say decontextualized activities, but it's a scramble to get the data based on the IEPs. But what people are finding is that the more your IEP goals and objectives are anchored to the ELDs, the easier it is to collect that data through naturalistic observation and play and through family input. But they're finding that there's pressure because we have families that are calling and asking for, is my child gonna be able to repeat with you next year? Is my child gonna be able to repeat with you next year? My child needs to repeat. So they're trying to scramble and get as much information as they possibly can. And sometimes it's not, and they admit, sometimes it's not as authentic performance data as they would like it to be. I love the fact that I'm hearing all of these folks that are gathering and asking families to engage, because that's actually where we're going to go next.
Okay, I guess I am talking now. So, and thank you, Julie. That was perfect coming into IEP. So yes, it's really important that your IEPs are in alignment with what the Connecticut Early Learning and Development Standards are. And what's interesting is when you do write connected to the ELDS IEPs, and when they're specific and they're measurable, you really have an idea of where you want to go and how you want to go and how you're going to collect that. You have a great system. One of the things that I didn't hear brought up as far as strategies, I was wondering if anyone during the pandemic revised children's IEPs to be more reflective of the environment in which children are in during the pandemic. So that might be an additional suggestion. And we also talked about the implementation plan for children who are being served remotely. So 2 essential things to do: write measurable IEP goals and objectives, and then have a system in place. And what it sounds like with most programs, there was a great system in place. We were having meetings, we were, periodically using our checklists and our data collection. And then when the bottom fell out and we are in this national crisis, it became a panic mode, and really connecting to families and children was the priority. So, so this is an opportunity for us to just take a deep breath and reflect back. So we're going to get an opportunity to write more IEPs and more goals. So maybe as we do that, we're going to be thinking about our experiences during this time, and we'll become much better at writing those goals and making them be priorities for families and caregivers. And those big high stakes goals that we know children are going to engage in every day. Okay.
So I want to commend everyone for that. those that are really working to engage families, especially those that are finding and sharing with us that since we are coaching families and helping them better understand their role in this whole teaching and learning process and how they can best help their child's development and how they can best help their child to meet their IEP goals, that we're finding as a result, the children are making progress. We have more people who are implementing the IEP in more authentic contexts. So kids are actually getting to apply it where they need to apply it, and kids are making progress. I wanted to kind of elaborate for a minute. There is, and all of these links are going to be at the end of this presentation in 2 slides, but Erickson Institute has free trainings for remote learning. This is the link for it. And when you pull the link up, it'll show the 4 different trainings. They're free. So you have a video, there's a PowerPoint, and then there's a workbook. And they're each is an hour long. I would highly recommend, I think they're an hour, they are 90 minutes. But I would highly recommend, if your staff has not had access to them, because I know it went out on the listserv, the Connecticut listserv, but not everyone in public schools subscribes to the Connecticut's early childhood listserv. They are free, and they have a host of ideas about social emotional learning in remote learning and how to engage families in remote learning. And there are, I mean, for as long as we've been doing this here, I went through all 4 and I had a lot of ahas, like, oh, that's a great idea. I can use that. That's a great activity that could easily be, reconstructed at home. And we could be asking families to kind of report back on that. Or if I can tune in, I can watch. So I would really encourage the Erickson Institute Remote Learning. The link to it is, it's here, but it's much larger on one of the following screens. Okay, so Judy, did you want to speak to this? And I'll go into the dots real quick after.
So making a plan. It sounded as though prior to the pandemic, people were comfortable with their plans. After and during the pandemic, it was kind of, survival mode, but being able to establish a plan. So here are some steps. Here are some things to think about. So how are you going to involve the family or the caregiver in providing you with information? Well, you set the stage. You set the stage. You let the adult that's going to be working with you know what it is that you're expecting of them, how you're going to support them, and how valuable their information is. So you set the stage of trusting that caregiver and developing a relationship. So you begin that way. And again, that leads into, well, what tools are you going to use to communicate with families? This is where you need to know the families that you're working with. What are they comfortable with? What level of technology? What time of the day are they available? When's the best time to have a conversation with them? How do you want to receive that information? And then there are several ways to do that with email, Seesaw, Schoology, Google Classroom. I know that some programs have Facebook. So there are a number of ways of doing that, but the important thing is you want to individualize for each family, and that relationship of trusting and respecting and sharing, really building that partnership. And the bottom line is planning for it.
Absolutely, thank you. So lots of folks, I was really happy to hear how many people are using the CT dots, because their IEPs, their IEP goals and objectives are anchored to the ELDs. So and what I also heard was that since the general ed teachers are collecting this data, progress monitoring data on the dots, you have your special ed folks and your related services who are kind of piggybacking and using this data in addition to what they're collecting themselves. I also heard that like OTs and PTs are doubling up so that, one person collects the data, but then they share with another person. So it's, and then through those regular meetings, they're having those, the case study meetings, they're sharing what they have found. But here in the dots, I know you can't see it here, but there's the link, and I have put the link in another slide towards the end. Family input questions. So if you're trying to figure out different ways to solicit that information from families, again, the DOTS has that family input component, and there's open and closed examples of questions for every learning progression and every age range. I also wanted to let you know, I'm not sure if you visited the website lately, but the OEC has published the pamphlets that can go home for families to collect data. And again, it's based on, so we have the strand, we have the learning progression, and then we have the age. And based on that are different questions that families can just check off. It is available in English and in Spanish. And this website right here, again, it would be a link on another slide, will take you directly there so you can select the age range, the strand, and the learning progression that you want to gather information on and send something like this home. And I'm going to let Anne-Marie speak to this slide real quick.
So this actually came up previously. Someone indicated, I think it was in our whole group, maybe it was in our small group, that there is this template available again on the OEC and SDE website. This I think was released, Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, when you and Michelle did the recorded webinar on remote learning for young children. And so the idea is that, again, as our IEP goals and objectives are more informed by the early learning and development standards, we could add a row. This says IEP objectives. We put in the current objective that is aligned with the domain and the learning progressions and strands from the ELDS. And then we can add, right, if we have a conversation with a family and we say, okay, let's talk about your routine and what are the kinds of things you're doing during the day. And a parent may say, one of our favorite things to do is to make pancakes that have feeling faces on them. And you may say that, well, that would be a great time to support your child to identify feelings words, which is one of her objectives. And so you can spend a minute talking about how the parent could do that. And then you're going to ask them the next time that you meet with them or talk with them, just keep track of how many feelings words she uses, and they'll share that data with you. But again, that goes back to setting the stage. This is a shift, right? We haven't had these kinds of interactions with families, and many of you probably have already had these conversations, but that tool, that form can structure your sharing of information with families. Did you want, yes? Julie, keep going.
Yep, keep going.
Okay, so this is again a framework. It is an official research-based framework for having that kind of interaction with families. It is pronounced SUPER. And again, those letters just stand for setting the stage. That and I think there's a handout that explains the steps in more depth. That if it isn't included as a resource, then I can make sure that that goes out to you. But no, it's not. That's something different. That might be resource overload. But anyway, setting the stage is just checking in. Here's what you were working on, that kind of thing. The other piece that sometimes if we think about this more from a family's perspective in terms of maybe not that you want to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning when they're making breakfast, but maybe at snack time or lunchtime, you're actually participating with the parent as they're doing it. So you're observing and you're coaching them essentially on how to support their children's growth and development, the implementation of those strategies during that time. Then you just reflect, how did you think it went? What could we do differently to get at what we wanted to get at? And then you engage in some planning. Understandably, this means that a parent has to be available to do this. I get that. That doesn't always work for everybody. But because everyone's situation is so different, it is something that we want to be able to consider. And as many of you have said, it gets a really big bang for its buck. The next framework is similar. It's just a different one. It's from NCPMI, and it talks about a very similar process for interacting with families in a remote interaction. And like I said, I think you may get access to a resource that explains the SUPER framework in a little more detail, but if not, we'll send it out.
Thank you very much. So okay, so we're gonna kind of wrap up here. Again, it's a roundtable. The idea is that you have an opportunity to kind of share information with colleagues. We can share additional resources with you. And it's your time to kind of take it, reflect on what's going on in your districts, and also kind of do a reflection with regard to what your district, what your team might need further support with. At the end, because progress monitoring, we really could do 3 full days on this. But for further, I just want to kind of skip to the last one. If you are interested in discussing with us, any of us further about progress monitoring in any particular areas, especially on those beginning slides, part of the process that might be disconnected for your team, and you'd like some additional support, coaching, technical assistance, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is here on the last slide, but I did want to alert you to the additional resources. So we have professional support webinars, and this is the webpage for that for State Department of Ed for early childhood. There is the State Department of Ed guidance for IEP progress monitoring. That is this document. There's the State Department of Ed bulletin, and I would highly encourage you subscribe to that or have access to that, because all of the updated and most current offerings are going to be there. The DOTS ideas for open and closed questions, we saw that slide, and here's the link for that. The parent pages for sending home to collect information. This is the free Erickson Institute one that I had said there are 4 free videos. Those videos, by the way, are only available until the end of February. I'm hoping they make them available a little bit longer, but they are really valuable. Some of the information is just review, but there are some really great ideas embedded throughout all 4 of them. Engaging families as assessment partners. I think everyone's going to walk away from today with that theme. Wow, we really need to be trusting families even more now. They are a critical part of our team, and those of us that have really worked hard to engage and coach families are finding some magnificent benefits in child development. So engaging families as assessment partners, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, they have a PDF and some really great videos. Remote service delivery, distance learning, again, Early Childhood Technical Assistance, there are several resources there and videos. And with that, if there's any questions, we can open it up. I realize we're 2 minutes past 10 o'clock, but we can stay on a couple extra minutes if anyone has any additional questions, comments, or anything further they'd like to share.
Yeah, I would just love if that Erickson videos could be extended at least through the month of March. We have PD in March, and I was hoping that my staff could use some of that to explore those videos. So if you have that, that would be great.
Okay, so I can check, I will check with Andrea and with Michelle at Office for Early Childhood to see, because I've also asked that they extend how long they're being offered for free and available at that site. So
yeah,
maybe we can
Yeah, Julie, that's definitely the OEC. They're the ones who had the project for extending that.
Okay, got it. We will check with Michelle Levy then. We'll check and we'll make sure that, especially if we can get it extended, we will send out an announcement to let everybody know.
perfect. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anyone else? Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, then I'm going to transition into, so we're going to be we'll send this out. Jean will send this out as she always does. You'll have the links in here. And we are going to be tackling pre-K to K transition in March. So please stay tuned for that. And we will be next week sharing this, an alterated version of this with your preschool teachers, your staff, hopefully your related services as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for your input, your ideas and sharing. We really, really appreciate it. And everyone, please be well and stay safe.
Thank you.